Düsseldorf. I visited this German city for the first time this year, and I have to admit, it has one of the best beer cultures in the world. Most people outside Germany, they know Bavaria and they know Oktoberfest and Weizenbier, but when you walk down the Balker streets in Düsseldorf's Old Town, then you understand why this area is called the biggest beer counter in the world. There's supposed to be 260 bars in this beautiful Old Town area, and there's one beer which they all serve, and it's Alt beer. And I'm going to show you how to make it. Alt stands for old, and that's because it was brewed long before the Pils beer. It's similar to the British ale, which means it's top fermented, which is perfect because that means I do not need to have a big fridge to cool the beer during fermentation. In fact, I do not have much space for bigger equipment in general. Therefore, I recommend you to have a look at my Weizenbier video where I explain all my equipment. Okay, let's start with the ingredients. The plan is to make 4 liters of beer. Historically, alt beer was made with a kind of brownish malt. These days are over, therefore we are going to use a combination of a bright Pilsner malt and with some dark Carafa malt. So for 4 liters of beer, we need 0.6 kilogram of Pilsner malt, 0.3 kilogram of Münchner 1, 0.05 kilogram of Caradred, and 0.02 kilogram of Carafa Special. Well, then we have 2 types of hops. We need 5 grams of Hallentauer Perle with an alpha acid of 10.5%, which I will call bitter hops, and then we will have 12 grams of Hallentauer Mittelfrüh with an alpha acid of 5.3%, which I will call aroma hops. If you cannot find the exact ingredients, the exact hops, no problem, just use something which has a similar alpha acid and you should be fine. Then we have the yeast. For this I use Fermentis SafAle S04, I hope I pronounced it correctly. And I will always use it again because the beer just turned out super tasty. Well, I'm using an ale yeast and I'm also fermented with quite high temperature, so you could also call it an ale. However, I was going for a specific taste from the Düsseldorf Schlüssel brewery, and I have to say, I think I got quite close. So therefore, if it's technically not perfectly an alt, it still tastes like one. Then there is the water. I'm going to prepare 4 liters of water plus 3.6 liters of Sparge Water. That's it. So let's start the mash. Heat up your water to 58 degrees and add all the malt. Together, water and malt, you should end up at 55 degrees mark. Keep it for 5 minutes at this temperature. Then increase the temperature to 62 degrees for the mash rest. Keep that for 40 minutes. Then heat up to 72 degrees for the saccharification rest, where you will keep it around 20 minutes or until it's iodine neutral. Finally, increase the temperature to 78 degrees, just for easier loitering. Put everything into lauter port, or if you do not have it, just strain it with a net or strainer. If you have a lauter port like me, just let the mash rest for around 10 minutes and then open the valve slowly. Capture the first part of the beer's worth and put it carefully back. We want to start when the wort becomes a little bit more clear. So when it's clear, let it run and wait. Short before the spent grain becomes visible, start adding your Sparge Water. If you have a refractometer like me, then you can measure the Brix value and calculate the degree plateau from there. I want the to end up at 11 degrees before cooking. If you do not have a refractometer, just add 3.6 liters of Sparge Water. Okay, let's start cooking the hops. It will take around 70 minutes in total. So heat up your wort until it starts cooking and then wait for around 10 minutes until you add all the bitter hops, so in my case the Hallentauer Perle. Split the aroma hops into 2 equal parts. After 50 minutes of cooking, add the first half of the aroma hops. Then wait until 5 minutes before the end, so at the 65-minute mark and at the last half of the aroma hops. After 70 minutes in total, you're done. Then you want to cool down as fast as possible to room temperature, so around 25 degrees Celsius. I use my sink with a little bit ice to speed up the cooling. Remember, you're now in a cold part of the brewery, so at this point you want to avoid anything which can contaminate the worth, so keep everything clean. Let's measure it again. This time I want to end up, so after the cooking, at 12.2 degree Plato. Afterwards we can dehydrate the yeast. I cooked up some water up front and let it cool down to room temperature to avoid any contamination. It will take about 15 minutes to dehydrate the yeast until it's ready. Meanwhile, you can start filtering the hops out of the worth by just using a little strainer, and at the same time also move it over to the fermentation pot. Then when you're done with that, just add the yeast on top of it and you're good for today. Just close the fermentation pot, or in my case my little bottle, and put it into a dark room and start waiting. At least 7 days. You can check on the beer and the leftover sugar. I wanted to end up at 4 degree Plato. Lower is better. Unfortunately, mine didn't ferment it so well, so I ended up at 5.5 degree Plato, but it still tasted good, so I think I'm fine. Now it's time to move the beer into the bottle and start conditioning. Also, the yeast needs a little bit more sugar for the conditioning to reduce the CO2 in the bottles, so I will add 0.4 gram of white sugar from the supermarket into every bottle. Again, it's time for waiting. This time I recommend 2 weeks until it's ready. After that's done, just put them into the fridge for 2 days and stop the fermentation. That's it, your alt beer is done. What's left is just to enjoy your beer, and while you do, maybe consider to visit the biggest beer counter in the world yourself. It's definitely worth it.